It's really key to ensure that we're doing these things earlier than later. That is, it's like our health. If we get ourselves checked out, then we feel a lot better about that, but sometimes it's hard to go to the doctor. Very similar in this situation. Getting a financial health check, we'll call it, is extremely important. Getting that done early up front.
In today's episode, we hear from Brett Smith, CEO of Rural Business Support, as we talk about financial health checkups for your agribusiness and the opportunities that are out there for support to keep your business strong and flourishing. Ashley Keegan also joins us again in this episode to add his own perspective from a grower's point of view. All the links to Rural Business Support can be found on the Wine Grape Council website.
Welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Vines, the wellbeing podcast for growers, proudly brought to you by the Wine Grape Council of South Australia, sponsored by PIRSA, hosted by
journalist and award-winning mental health podcaster Callum McPherson,
and columnist for The Australian and the World of Fine Wine and Australia's leading wine writer when sold by the kilo, Nick Ryan. Let's crush this.
Brett, give us a rundown on what Rural Business Support is all about.
Well, Callum, to start with, Rural Business Support is an independent charity. We're registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, and we've been working in South Australia with primary producers since 2006. Importantly, we're a free, independent and confidential financial counselling service, and as I said, we service primary producers, and we also, more recently, have been servicing what we call Main Street businesses, so those small community businesses that at times are involved with our primary producers, either by servicing primary producers or value adding through the rural communities. We've expanded our service offering from financial counselling, as I said, to small business financial counselling. We also offer a landowner information service that helps landowners and primary producers navigate through the Mining Act. So we help them understand the Mining Act. We offer proactive management programs as well, not just reactive management programs. We are a charity and we're leveraging our charity status to be able to collect money from like-minded individuals to enhance our program offering for primary producers.
What are the most common challenges that those primary producers face, as well as the small rural business owners?
There's two parts to it. One is ongoing viability, and I guess the economies of scale and the changes that have been occurring with our primary industries over many, many decades. It takes a lot more land, takes a lot more knowledge and know-how to make a buck. So we've seen a lot of small primary producers leave the industry over the years, and they've needed help in making those decisions about whether they stay in farming or they depart farming, or they change something about what it is that they're doing to do it better. So that's one part of it. The other part of it also is the fact that we've had a lot of adversity. It's a tough environment in which we're trying to actually make a buck in farming in this country. So we have droughts, we have floods, we have fires, and more recently we've had other events like COVID, which has had an impact as well. So this adversity can hit a business that might already have some fragility, might also already be having some financial difficulty, and hit that business hard to take it to that next level where it's, where the viability of that business is really in question. So it's a double whammy or triple whammy, sometimes we call it, in terms of the number of impacts that might be impacting that small business at any particular time.
What sort of damage have you seen that financial trouble do to people's lives when we're facing adversities like this?
Well, I guess, financial difficulty is a big precursor to well-being and mental health. So one of the big impacts, of course, is in that space. Often when we come into a business to help, we find that it could be that they are in a state of shock, decision paralysis. They're not making decisions readily because they are highly stressed from the situation that they find themselves in, or it may even be moving more towards, mental health issues, etc. So part of what we do is when we get there is to help people either seek additional help around what we just talked about. It might be mental health, or to help them in terms of their financial position. Because once you actually start working on the financial position, then it gets easier to make decisions and decisions around options moving forward.
Ash, what's been your experience with accessing business support services?
Yeah, Callum, I guess I'm operating in a sort of pretty large corporate structure. So, by definition, we sit around a board table with some pretty high horsepower minds. And so we've either got a lot of that internally, or we've got detailed structures in with our finances and things as well. So it's a bit different in the corporate sector. Still, you face the same challenges, but I see it at a lot of farm level where I might go in to look at an asset that's on the market or something of that nature, and start to then you're looking at the numbers, or you're looking at the positions that the individual farms are in. I concur with what Brett's saying, is getting that understanding early of exactly where you're at is really, really important. Because as a business, whether it be our business or someone else's, they're going to quickly look at some of those lead indicators in your business as well.
Anecdotally, what do you think the attitude is generally among growers and looking after their financial health, and whether it's something that's easily put off and put to the side, or something that's more commonly addressed? What do you see more of?
Yeah, I think that's, generally you're a farmer because you love being outside. Your wheelhouse and your superpower is making stuff grow and, raging against Mother Nature, and it's that sort of fabric of what we do. So as a general comment, financial literacy is not necessarily in the wheelhouse, and it's pretty easy to put aside because, we're busy being busy. We're busy because we've got to get that seed in the ground, or we're busy because it's raining next week, and it's a bit like our own health checks. It's easier to put off.
You agree with that, Brett?
Oh, definitely. It's working in the business rather than working on the business, as a term used. And the financial side of things, or the financial acumen, is not necessarily we use the word sexy. It's not the sexy stuff that a lot of our producers find within working in their business. They prefer to do the other things. So it tends to be put aside or left up to others. And when it's left up to others, then sometimes that's putting it in the hands of a third party, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any means, but it's just a little bit more removed, and it's about actually understanding, stopping and taking the time to understand what someone else is actually telling you about your business. Sometimes maybe the listening doesn't necessarily occur in that situation. So fully concur.
Yeah, and I mean, how often are you finding situations where you're getting a phone call, someone's in trouble, and you come in and have a look at what's going on and go, if we were here 12 months ago, we wouldn't be here today?
I reckon it's probably about 100%, Nick. It really is. It's about being proactive, and I mean, we're all human, and we all we probably all fall into that trap in one way, all ourselves, as individuals. There's plenty of times where we go, I should have done that and I didn't. So it's really key to ensure that we're doing these things earlier than later. That is, it's like our health. If we get ourselves checked out, then that we feel a lot better about that, but sometimes it's hard to go to the doctor. Very similar in this situation. Getting a financial health check, we'll call it, is extremely important. Getting that done early up front.
How much do you think people's lack of initiative is based on the fact that they're not comfortable with that? They don't know. They're not financially literate. They don't have the skills, and they can work the land better than anyone, or as well as anyone, because that's what they've grown up with or spent most of their life doing. So we want to do what we're good at, what we're comfortable with, and we don't really want to do the stuff that we're not really sure about because it makes us feel incompetent, or certainly it doesn't give us the same feeling as doing what we shine at. So how big a part of what you do, Brett, is upskilling people and giving them that confidence so that it is something that they want to manage because they actually feel like they have some idea what they're doing?
Oh, it's certainly a big part of what we do, Callum. I mean, we can work with our clients for up to 3 years. That's the level of service that we're allowed to give. And, you know, over that time, our counsellors take our clients through a process. And, you know, part of the process is obviously getting them financially stable to start with, so that, you know, we remove some of those wellbeing issues that we talked about before. We'll try and remove those wellbeing issues so that there is listening and understanding and learning going on about exactly what you just said, about where the situation is, and then what are the options that can be followed through over that 3-year period. So it's very much about that, very much about, it's almost coaching.
And what does that 3 years look like in terms of how often are you seeing these people and what capacity you're working with them in? What kind of a commitment is it, I suppose, if you're signing on and working with rural business support for a period of years?
The initial part of it is to stabilise. So obviously in some situations that may be quite quick and easy. In other situations it might be a lot more difficult. Probably comes back to what we talked about before. How long has this been going on for? If this has been something that's been going on for a decade, by the time we get there, it might be a lot bigger job to do that stabilising. If it's something that's been going on for a short period of time, it might be a much easier, quick outcome. And then it's about really the financial understanding of the business, so or the financial position of the business. So where is the business at? You know, P&L, balance sheet work, for example. And then working with the client to make sure that they understand what it is that we're looking at and taking them through that process. At the end of the 3 years, it doesn't always have to be 3 years. It could be a year, it could be 2 years. But at the end of the period that we work with the clients, we'd like to think there is behavioural change. We'd like to think there is learning that has occurred through the process, and they are in a much better position at the end of the process in terms of their financial acumen, their financial understanding. And if that's not the case as an individual, then there are others that we've brought in through the referral process to assist and help them moving forward.
What do you see happen as a result of that when you do leave them better off and it's a case, it sounds like, of teach a man to fish and, you know, therefore you can fish for yourself? How do you see that change people's lives and how are they able to then look after themselves better after you finish working with them?
Well, I think, you know, we know, you know, we're not big noting ourselves, but we know that, you know, the majority of people that work with us have a very positive experience. They are in a much better position as a result of working with RBS than they were when they came to RBS. And I guess those outcomes can be sometimes might be small, those outcomes might be significant. The decision making that has occurred as a result of, you know, dealing with RBS can be life-changing in different ways. There's many different outcomes, so it's a bit of a hard one to answer. But, you know, the majority of people that deal with us are in a much better position in terms of that experience.
Every enterprise has to navigate landmines. Where are the big landmines for viticulture and, you know, the business landmines?
The elephant in the room at the moment is the supply-demand situation, obviously driven a lot by decline in red wine, demand from the China tariff situation. It'd be fair to say that's probably one of the biggest sort of detonations that I've seen in my career underneath the industry, in both amplitude and speed at which it flipped along. You know, we came out of the millennial drought where most businesses did it tough. You mined into your balance sheets, you grow out of that. You know, we saw some, you know, really nice strong green shoots and a situation where, you know, growers were starting to, you know, get a couple of rungs up the ladder to then have that sort of turn on its head almost overnight. So, you know, there are a whole lot of other challenges from a, you know, farming enterprise perspective, and Mother Nature's pretty good adversary sometimes as well. But that situation where your market flips is very difficult to engineer around, and it's sort of a situation where it's not just, you know, you're on permanent planting, so I can't decide tomorrow I'm going to go and grow canola instead. I'm embedded down a pathway that you need to then navigate quite carefully.
What can be learned from that?
Look, I guess it's like any business, Callum, or any enterprise. You know, diversity's not a bad idea, both in, at a paddock level, even variety situations where we've seen Shiraz and Cab fall off, whereas domestically white wine scenario is quite positive at the moment. So we and our business geographically diversify as well, different regions, so we haven't got all our eggs in one basket, but diversity from a point of view of the varieties, the customer base that you have as well, spread your customer base. Is
it possible for everyone, dependent on, obviously different regions have different strengths, but do you think everyone has the capacity to diversify, or is that more of a reality for some than others?
Yeah, I think it's a simple decision, like if I've got 10 acres of grapes, I can have a couple of varieties and I can have a couple of customers. And just that simple, because, not all customers go through different ebbs and flows at different times, and that's not a bad de-risking in that single decision that you've got to make. So, yeah, I think each decision that we make, I'd ask myself as to, does diversification give me a risk mitigation? And it's, without bogging down, it's why our superannuation funds are diversified into a whole lot of different spaces, because that de-risks us a little bit.
Brett, what are you hearing a lot of at the moment when people come to you? And is it often as a last resort, or are you getting people being a bit more aware and coming in a bit earlier?
Yeah, I think we're starting to change things from last resort to coming to RBS to have those early discussions, and then we're working with many industries around changing that way of thinking. And we talked about that. Nick mentioned that before in terms of being a bit more proactive. So yeah, we are seeing more clients coming to us and having those discussions around options for diversity, for example, around what am I going to do for next year's crop? Do I grow this or do I grow that? And making those early decisions rather than just going with the flow. And I think it's very important to have those discussions up front, nice and early.
In a lot of businesses, you can make the sort of forward projections based on contracts you might have, which is not necessarily the case in viticulture. I mean, the uncertainty around contracts seems to be such a big issue in this industry.
You're right. Back in the boom of the mid-90s, there was plenty of long-term contract structured up. That's the exception rather than the rule now, and there's a lot of short-term positions, and a 2-year or a 3-year deal is a good deal at the moment. So I think that changes the landscape and changes your risk profile as well. But I couldn't concur more. I'm sort of sitting here listening to Brett think about the fact that I think if I wasn't in a corporate structure, I'd be sitting there. So you mentioned it before, so it's almost like a coaching example. I mean, Roger Federer is a pretty good tennis player. He's still got a coach. Yeah. And I think the opportunity to discuss it, you'd be aware of, if I might sit there and go, hey, bro, I'm going to go citrus. You go, well, I've got lots of clients that are in citrus. That's not floating the boat, or it's a sounding board, an opportunity to think out loud and in what can be sometimes quite complex,
Yeah, and I think just adding to that, it is, we are, again, a free and confidential service. So there's no cost involved here for those that wish to utilise the service. And I think it's that other set of eyes coming into the business. So it challenges. And I think that's really important. Is the way we're doing things, is that the right way, or is there another way to do things? Or what are other people doing perhaps in other areas? We've got over 20 financial counsellors throughout the state, working across the areas that, where we have viticulture, for example, and many of them are involved. Some are involved in viticulture as well. So they're quite experienced, and they're sharing ideas, and they're sharing what they're hearing and seeing amongst themselves. So the ability to actually sit down and talk about what's happening, I think it's important. I think it's healthy for a business to challenge itself, and it's healthy to have discussions and think about new ideas, for example.
And not just how do we fix a dire problem, but how can we maximise what you're doing already? So working with people where they're actually doing quite well, but they have that sounding board and they can do things even better, or they can set themselves up better so that when shit does hit the proverbial fan later on, they're in a better position than they might be. So not waiting to the point where something crops up.
Yep.
Given that it is a free service, why do you think people have been reluctant in the past or treated it as a last resort?
It's just maybe perhaps where the program has come from, where it was traditionally more about, dare I say it, the bottom end and those that were exiting the industry for whatever particular reason. It's perhaps still in people's minds, that's what the service does. But
Like the Undertaker.
oh, well, very, very good, Nick. I've had that described to me before about in the old days, it would be probably if there was a wake, the Undertaker would be told to go away and the RFCS would be as well in a small town. But we're changing that perception. We're turning things into it is a much more proactive service than it was, and we think it's, again, very healthy for those discussions to happen, just as we said before, Callum.
I mean, these are complex businesses we're talking about, but and it's always dangerous to oversimplify. But could you even come up with a list of half a dozen things that you stick on the fridge and you look at every day that, as you're walking out each morning, you've just got front of mind to keep the business healthy?
Yeah. And I think that, and that's one of that's one of the things that we're proposing here today is we'd love to come and talk to those producers that are happy to come and talk to us about a business health check. Those 10 things that they should be keeping their eye on through this difficult period, and then questioning those things. Well, some of them, Nick, are in relation to understanding P&L, understanding balance sheet. You should understand your P&L position. You should understand your balance sheet. You should have a good idea of your cash flow. They're the three important ones from a financial perspective. And if a business doesn't understand those three things or doesn't understand where it's at with those three things, well, I think there's a question mark.
Yeah.
All right. So they're the three ones. Adding to that, how are you going with your bank relationship? So it's more about those sorts of things. Bank relationships, your stakeholders in the business. Bank relationship, very important. Family relationship, because sometimes these family businesses aren't necessarily as simple as one might think. They might be multiple families running an enterprise with lots of siblings. Now, how is that all happening and how's that all getting on? And sometimes when you come under financial pressure because of a circumstance that we're faced with now, those things really come to the fore.
Yeah.
Insurance, they're roughly the getting close to the 10 things, Nick.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's interesting listening to you. It's funny from a service perspective, because I think if you're working for someone, I look at your service as a completely different way. If I was a generational farmer and I've got my son coming through, I'm thinking about 3 years with you sitting around the kitchen table going, that's almost like a finance degree that they're going to get. Mm. You're going to teach you financial literacy that...
and more applicable as well.
Correct. And it's about our business. I just think that's, like, literally you can go to uni for 3 years or you can sit and do an in-house situation. And it is a language, let's face it. And your bank manager knows the language and he's the guy in control sometimes as well. So I sort of look at it almost as an opportunity to bring a next generation or, the family through as well.
Is that happening a bit more?
Yeah, no, it's probably just building on what we were saying about the family before. I mean, part of it is family planning, I guess, but the other part of that is succession. We're seeing a lot more younger people wanting to be involved in the family enterprises moving forward. And there was a period there where that was becoming a lot more difficult. It wasn't agriculture, no matter what industry, wasn't seen to be, use the word sexy again, it wasn't seen to be sexy. And many drifted off. And now we're seeing, I know we're seeing a tough time in front of us, but we're seeing a lot more optimism across much of agriculture to what we had, and a lot more are wanting to actually be part of the business moving forward. So, but sometimes that's easy to say and very difficult in terms of, how many are involved and how that works. So part of what we do is we work on the succession part of. We're not succession specialists, but we can help move the business towards that thinking and the early stages, and then bring in other professionals to actually help
And
with
you can
the
see how
detail.
important a third party, a slightly removed, entity would be, because I mean the potential for conflict in, family businesses around succession is huge. I mean, we've all seen it.
Yep.
There are probably more examples of it not working than it actually working. So to have someone removed, to be able to
Pin the blame on.
to offer advice when not necessarily everyone is thinking clearly about what the issues are.
Yeah.
Take the emotion out of it. Must
But
be
also
really important.
potentially just to point at the elephant as well, of that thing that we don't talk about because that's an uncomfortable conversation. It's on the list, point at it and say, well, how are we dealing with that? In that context as well.
Oh, look, there's so many examples where we go into a business and those conversations have not even happened,
But stuff is festered in the background, and
and the age of people is right at the other end of working life, and these discussions aren't happening. So it's just headed for disaster. So very important as part of that health checklist to be having that there as a discussion.
Because we don't want to bite the bullet and have that discussion because it's going to be uncomfortable. So better to avoid it, just like with everything else, just like with going to the doctor, just like with talking about your mental health. We know that's going to be an uncomfortable moment. So a lot of the time we'd rather push it away and then always have it in the back of the mind. But I think with this, although I don't have personal experience with it, but just like with everything else, it's actually the thinking about that and overthinking how that's going to go and catastrophizing about it that ends up doing more damage than just nipping it in the bud.
Yeah, and look, I think one of the things again about the financial counsellors is that, and we talked about the 3-year period, but I guess the relationship that develops between the counsellor and the business owners, the small business owners, the farmers, etc., is one in which those conversations that can be challenged
because there's trust
and bring trust, and those conversations are put on what we call the kitchen table, and often when you're sitting at the kitchen table and you've got mum, dad, and you've got the daughter and the son or whatever. A lot of those things you just mentioned are under the table.
And everyone knows they are.
They're all there, but they're not talked about. Right? So the ability of a financial counsellor to be able to draw those out and be able to put them on the table for discussion is part of what they do. So I think it's really important. It's really, really important that those discussions occur, because if they don't, then we're sailing into the abyss.
But I also like that, because I call it power of a problem. I like that because with that problem, with that opportunity is potentially change. It might be that's where the innovation comes from. That's where the new idea comes from. Because if we just keep doing what we've always done, we're always going to get what we've got. And so that opportunity to sit down and really put it under the microscope it doesn't have to be negative or scary. It can be positive and potentially
transformative.
Correct.
It is that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
What do you think is changing where those future generations are more keen to come in and take over, when we've seen in previous years that they'd rather not be involved with the family business? As we noted, it's not like it's all rosy at the moment, or that we've got a future outlook where everything's going to be smooth sailing. Why do you think younger people are more keen to be involved?
We can't be too hard on ourselves here too, because we've come a long way from, I don't know, for want of words, the old days, where virtually no discussions occurred, and it was almost, the oldest son was expected to come back onto the farm and everyone else disappeared. How that happened was how it happened. But look, I think there are discussions that are occurring in a lot of family operations. Not always, and that's where we come in and we do what we do. But there are more positive discussions that are occurring, because it is a much more modern world than it was many, many years ago. So those discussions and, mature discussions about what do you want to do and go away and get a degree and do this and whatever else, and then come back, the sorts of discussions that are occurring in a number of operations. So I would answer it that way, Callum.
What makes succession go smoothly? When do you see it go well? Are there a number of boxes that get ticked where things generally come together a lot more than otherwise?
It's a bit of a hard one to answer, because I think every operation is different. And sometimes the discussion can be very quick, and sometimes these discussions can be going on for a lot of years. So yeah, I think it's horses for courses, Callum. It's a difficult one to answer.
But it can be hard when there's a lot of people to keep happy, and I suppose depending on how many siblings there are and who's interested versus just having one child that wants to take over, or if there's the whole suite, and then
absolutely
all those competing interests.
Absolutely, yep, and extended families, because sometimes it could be two siblings from the original owner that have got interests in that operation, and they've got siblings.
There's certain units of scale that make what we do work, and getting those right is really important.
Yep.
And benchmarking against that, it's often those sort of little 1%ers that are really important. So imagine in that scenario, trying to chop up or call it an efficient unit, chop that into inefficient units becomes problematic, and understanding it's probably one thing I think we could, and I'm sure you do a bit of, Brett, but the benchmarking component of it, just to know where you're at, compared to our neighbours or our peers in the industry as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We talked earlier a little bit about uncertainty, and we talked about there are challenges coming down the pipe, but also sometimes you've got to spend money to make some money as well. I mean, how do you advise people to spend wisely? How do you advise people about debt loads that they can carry and all those sorts of things?
I guess, Nick, it just really comes down to what the operators want to do. I mean, do they want to buy the farm next door?
No.
I think most of the operators we get to are not necessarily thinking about the farm next door.
Yeah.
They're thinking about how they actually keep their farm going.
But what if keeping the farm going is getting a new harvester?
Well, then I think for me, it's about understanding how do you calculate a return on investment, or how do you calculate a net present value, simple sort of financial metrics that help you make that. Even in the toughest of times, you've got to sort of sit there and go, I know, because intrinsically I should do that, because I'm spending $60,000 a year fixing that old heap of junk, and then understanding, but if I go and lease a new unit, then I can actually save money. But you have to either get help making that calculation, or learn how to do that calculation. Because if you go to your bank manager with a screaming NPV or a higher ROI, they'll work with you to help do that, and they get it. And in fact, they like that stuff to show that you're actually actively thinking about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just becoming into a sort of a spiralling situation where all your gear's getting older.
And you're just sitting on your hands.
Correct. And how do you get your way out of that? And it becomes a bigger elephant to consume at that point.
And I'll just add to that. I think and that's well answered. And I think the other part to that is when our counsellors are in the background helping a producer with that decision making and going through the process of NPVs and cost benefit, etc. The banks like the fact that financial counsellors are actually involved. Actually, it gives them comfort, because the uncomfortable.
And then the discussions with the bank, does it go that far that it's almost like sitting in the manager's office holding hands?
We can. I mean, we never make decisions for people.
But if someone asked for you to come with them, you can.
And those real, not just about whether they need an extra $100,000 to buy a new machine. It's more about whether $100,000 overdraft to get through the tough time. Because banks aren't throwing money around as much as they used to. Having a counsellor involved in the background gives them comfort that there's that other set of eyes having a look at what's going on, rather than whatever's been going on. Because if it's just the same old, if I was handing out money, I'd be probably going, well, hang on, how'd you get here? Rather than have gain that other set of eyes. Same as, when it's an even more difficult discussion, when banks are really getting nervous and you're moving towards that, not say farm debt mediation type process, but we do get involved in that end of it with the Small Business Commissioner's Office, but it's called pre-mediation. So we do get involved in those discussions.
What lessons were there to be learned from the pandemic and dealing with people through that difficult time, which is still ongoing? But
the pandemic was just another one. Well, it was part of that triple whammy. It was on top of drought, fire, and then we had COVID. What we found was that in the main, the banks, if that's where we're still at, were very reasonable about where things were. Again, there's responsible lending and there's irresponsible lending, and there's been a lot that's happened in the background around that over the last 4 or 5 years. So they were reasonable in dealing with many producers across many industries through the tough times.
Don't assume your bank don't already know what's going on as well. Like I think, they're banking your neighbours, and down the road you get a hailstorm or a weather event or whatever, they're aware of it. They're understanding that. So my view is that they're one of the first phone calls you make. And you make them in good times and bad. You just get a habit of communicating regularly and systematically. And my experience is they like that. And, they'll get to know you as a personality as well.
Do you think banks get a bit of a bad rap sometimes?
I think if we use the pandemic as an example, I think they've done well. I think, we've all sort of entered this situation, no idea what's on the other side of it. And I think they're part of the team. If you've got debt, then automatically they're part of the team. You want to sort of go together. So, yeah.
I just add one other thing there with banks. It's really important to be open with the banks. In the main, they'll know what's going on. They know what's going on. They know the industry, where the industry's at. They know there's a problem, right? So they'll take that into consideration. But as an individual enterprise, if there's a particular additional problem that's going on, or the financial position of that business is in question, be open with the banks. Don't close up, because one of the biggest problems that we find is sometimes when we get there, the conversation with that key stakeholder of the business has ceased to exist.
And there's a drawer full of letters from the bank that have been unopened and...
Yeah. Probably not that bad, but sometimes, but Nick, that's the the drawer full of letters. But maybe not that bad. But the conversations aren't necessarily occurring the way they used to. But that's a telltale sign to the bank, by the way. Yeah. And then they get nervous. So you need to open up those discussions. And that's what the counsellor can do, can help with those discussions.
Ash, what was your attitude in regards to managing your finances when you first started out?
I was so busy trying to learn how to, not kill vines and fill them full of Roundup and sort of damage the asset. I was so focused on learning how to grow and spent a lot of time doing that. And it wasn't really until I sort of grew into a position where I was sitting around a board table, and it became apparent to me then that most people around the table have got higher financial literacy and horsepower than I had. My own career perspective, I sort of decided that I wanted to go off and learn the language, and so went and did that. Not because it's still, it's not a superpower of mine, and I don't really want it to be a superpower. I rather be more of an expert in the operations and the farming of what we do, but I needed to sort of learn the language to at least be able to make better decisions at an operation.
How did you learn it?
I inflicted myself with a finance MBA to do it, sort of, and it took some skin off, and it was hard work, but it was the injection that it.
Why was that worth it for you though, going forward?
Literally, it taught me the language when we sort of looked at, different enterprise, whether we wanted to be part of that or whether I was looking at an enterprise that needed some help. I was able to sort of put my growing expertise together with the financial understanding of the metrics and come up with sort of 1 + 1 = 3. I was able to contribute more at that and maybe see solutions that were a bit different. And
so when you're hearing Brett talking about RBS and the fact that that's a free service that anyone can access from a grower's perspective, what are you thinking?
I just sort of sit there and say, to me, it's a no-brainer that if, let's say, I was on a family farm and my son was involved, I'd be calling in just so that you're not listening to Dad.
Yeah,
you're listening to someone else, and I'm giving you an opportunity, because you might not be going to uni, that might not be your thing, But to sit around a table one-on-one like that is, that's gold. That's a huge opportunity to build a relationship and a challenged question on your own farm.
Do you think we accept financial vulnerability and uncertainty too easily in this business? I mean, there's always the joke, how do you start with how do you make a small fortune, in the wine business? You start with a big one. It's just part of the culture that,
Yeah, I don't accept that. I think you sort of, I love growing stuff, but if all we did was diminish an asset to do that and then you hand the keys to someone else, that's not rewarding from my perspective. It's how do we innovate? How do we take the opportunities? We're operating in a time now where there's just scary amounts of opportunity to do things a bit differently. It's how do you spot those opportunities, do the maths and go, that's potentially a direction that I need to head in. So I work with some international pension funds and the way they think about at a global remit, they can go and put dollars anywhere on the planet they like, and they're pretty structured about the way they go about it. They'll look hard at where they can deploy our superannuation money and make that go to work for them. So we should be thinking the same way, because whether it's you're handing down to your son or your nephew, or whether you're trade sailing out of there,
or daughter,
or you're going to sell your property, or whatever you're going to do, every other person's going to look at your business through that filter. So if you're not looking through that filter, then you're not potentially making the best decisions. Now, if you're going to hold it for 48 generations, fine, do something different. But if you're like most of us and hoping the family unit holds together or the business,
hand something on,
then put that filter through it, because everybody else is.
It's the same filter and the same principles, no matter whether you're a corporate or a family farm.
Correct. And you just never know. We talked about health and individual health, and you'd see it all the time. I'm sure that the patriarch has a health issue or a health scare, and that all of a sudden creates the impetus for change or need for support, because what do we do now? And so, we're all human beings, none of us are bulletproof in that context. So.
Yeah, it's just about being proactive rather than reactive all the time, because life happens and keeps happening, and you can't sort of just bury your head in the sand and expect that it's always going to be fine if you haven't taken any of those measures to try to account for those things that might go wrong. Not that we should be living our lives paranoid either, but just being realistic, I suppose. You got any success stories that spring to mind?
What, specifically around?
Just people who've perhaps come to you struggling or wanting to learn something, and they've ended up with a significant payoff and felt a lot better about their situation?
Well, we can't mention names. So that's one of the. We are a confidential business. As I said before, and I'm not going to talk specifics. I'll talk general. 95% of people that come and use our service walk away with a positive experience, and they walk away to a better position. So I think maybe that answers the question. Only about 10% of producers that deal with us exit the industry. So 90% of them stay within the industry. So I'm about making sure that, we have family businesses staying in the industry, not necessarily leaving the industry. So to me, that's a measure of success. If 90% of the people that come to us are actually still in the industry 5 years later, that's a good thing. So I think overall, the outcomes that we get are very positive.
Would you say it's actually easier, I know it's subjective, in most cases for people to make some changes and start to turn things around than perhaps they think it's going to be when they first make contact?
Yeah, I think many that come to us, not really thinking about, what this means in the long term. I think they get exposed to a lot more than they think they're going to get exposed to, and I think the outcomes they get as a result of that exposure are much more positive than what they thought when they came to the service. So, again, that maybe is an encouraging comment for those that are thinking about talking to RBS. In that you really don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
and that's a term that we use within our organisation all the time. It's really that comment.
It's very much. I mean, and our focus today, and obviously your focus is always about the 90% that are going to keep going and stay in, but sometimes exiting is the only option. How do you manage that to get the best possible result from someone having to exit the industry?
To answer that is maybe answering Callum's question before, is we have a number of clients that have used our service that have exited the industry. Now, if you're multi-generational and you're the one walking away from the farm, that is a big hit.
Hard. Yeah.
That is hard, and it comes to the psychology and potentially some of the well-being and mental health issues that exist, and why people hang on, and that's why they hang on. So you can imagine the discussion that's occurred over 3 years to get to a point where someone actually chooses the option to leave. Now, that's not necessarily great at the time when they do make that decision, but the ones that we talk to at a later date, and I've bumped into plenty that have said, I've used your service and I used to farm here and now I'm doing other things with my life, are over the moon because their lives are so much better as a result of making that decision. I know it's hard at the time, but sometimes things don't go on forever, and sometimes the best decision is just to leave and get out respectively, and get out with something. And that's when we start moving down that track, that's what we try and achieve.
Yeah.
So what's the first step to accessing your services? Can people access it no matter where they are? Or?
If you're going really, really well and you're using consultants, then you're probably not necessarily, you're already getting that. You're already being proactive. You're already reaching out. You're bringing in that advice within your business. We're more talking about those that don't have access to those services, those that are potentially at imminent risk, which is probably a fair chunk of the industry at the moment, given the discussion that we're having here today.
At any time in agriculture, you're at imminent risk. That's permanent state of affairs.
Imminent risk or financial difficulty. So that's how anyone who's at imminent risk or in financial difficulty can utilise our service. Again, so that's a fair chunk of who's out there. It's a matter of contacting us, ringing our 1-800 number, and then asking to seek help from our service. It's pretty simple, Callum. We will put them in touch with a rural financial counsellor who will come to them and sit down with them in their kitchen, at the kitchen table, and start the conversation.
Ash, the fact that this is a service that's available, how valuable is that?
Whether you're even contemplating, plan B, or you're, going to stay the course, I think there's a huge amount of merit in sitting down and doing a reality check, a health check for your business. I just don't see any downside of that, to be frank, Callum. I think it's like a lot of stuff in health. The more proactive we can be, the better off you're going to be.
Got that number for us there, Brett?
I do have that number, Callum.
What is
it's 1-800-836-211.
So I think the message is don't wait and don't feel embarrassed. It makes a lot of sense to reach out as soon as you can and get this stuff sorted so that it doesn't become more of a problem down the line.
Yep, and have that business health check, have that discussion, see where it goes. It can't hurt.
Thanks for listening. Head to the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website for links and further resources. This is part of a bigger conversation, so feel free to share this podcast with your mates and look after yourselves. Cheers.